I'm Molly, 34 female. I live in a city that's just big enough to feel anonymous, but small enough that you still run into people you know at the grocery store. For the last 10 years, my life has been a predictable rhythm of spreadsheets, financial reports, and quiet evenings in my small, meticulously kept apartment, a sanctuary from the noise of the world. My job as a senior financial analyst is demanding, but it's given me a stability my family never had, a stability I was always taught to share. The story I'm about to tell isn't about numbers or portfolios. It's about the day I learned that the family I had invested my entire life in had written me off their balance sheet, and the cold, calculated decision I made to divest. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The holiday season had always been a complicated affair in my family, but it was, for the most part, a mandatory one. Ever since my mom passed away a decade ago, I had stepped into the role of the quiet organizer, the one who made sure the emotional and often financial gaps were filled. My dad, Robert, was a good man but was lost in the details of life. After a career as an electrician, he was now retired, living off a modest pension and the supplemental income I provided. His sister, my Aunt Susan, a high school teacher with a flair for the dramatic, and her two daughters, Jessica and Chloe, completed our small, tightly knit, and often tangled family unit. This year, however, was different. The usual buzz of holiday planning was replaced by an unsettling quiet. The first sign that something was amiss came in early December. I called my dad to ask about our plans for Christmas. Normally, by this time, we would have had at least 3 conversations about who was bringing what, the logistics of getting the tree, and the endless debate over my mom's stuffing recipe. "Oh, honey," Dad said, his voice sounding oddly distant over the phone. "About Christmas, Susan and I were talking. Things are just, well, they're really tight for everyone this year." I frowned, my pen hovering over a notepad on my desk. "Tight how? I can help out, you know that. I was already planning on covering the groceries and getting the turkey." This was standard practice. I made a comfortable living, far more than anyone else in the family, and I never minded contributing. It felt like the least I could do. No, it's not just that," he stammered, a sound I recognized as his tell when he was uncomfortable. "It's everything. The economy, the heating bills. Susan's car is making a funny noise again. We just thought it would be better to have a really quiet one this year. No big dinner, no gifts, just staying in our own homes. We can do a video call or something." The suggestion was so out of character, it felt like a slap. Our Christmases were our one non-negotiable tradition, a loud, chaotic, and loving tribute to my mom's memory. It was the one day a year we all put aside our differences and simply existed as a family. The idea of canceling it felt like canceling a part of her. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "We don't have to do anything fancy. I can come over, we can just watch movies, I'll bring dinner." "Molly, please," he said, a weary sigh crackling through the receiver. "Don't make this harder. It's a group decision. Susan and the girls feel the same way. It's better this way, just for this year. We'll make it up next year, I promise." I didn't push. Arguing with my dad when he was in this state was like pushing against a loose brick in a wall. It just crumbled and made a mess. I hung up the phone with a hollow feeling in my chest. A quiet Christmas. Alone. The thought was a foreign and unwelcome one. Over the next few weeks, the silence from my family was deafening. My texts to my cousins went answered with short, non-committal replies. Jessica, who was usually a prolific social media user, had gone strangely quiet online. Chloe, typically the more considerate of the two, sent a brief text saying she was swamped with final exams for her nursing program. Aunt Susan didn't respond to my calls at all. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe things really were that bad for them. I knew Susan struggled on her teacher's salary, and Jessica's job as a social media manager for small local businesses was hardly a goldmine. I even sent a bit of extra money to my dad's account, labeling it for the heating bill. hoping it would ease whatever burden was so heavy that it was crushing our Christmas. He sent back a simple, "Thanks, honey. You're a good daughter." As Christmas Day approached, a deep sense of melancholy settled over me. I bought a small, sad-looking fir tree for my apartment and decorated it with the few ornaments I had. I planned a menu for one, a small roasted chicken, some garlic mashed potatoes, and a glass of expensive wine. I told myself it was fine. It was mature. It was what responsible adults did when circumstances demanded it. I was being understanding and supportive of my family's financial struggles. On Christmas morning, I woke up to a profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of church bells. My apartment, usually a place of comfort, felt like a cage. I sent a group text to my dad, aunt, and cousins. "Merry Christmas, thinking of you all and sending my love. Can't wait until we can all celebrate properly." The replies trickled in over the next few hours. "Dad, Merry Christmas, honey, love you." "Aunt Susan, Merry Christmas, Molly." "Chloe, Merry Christmas, hope you have a cozy day." Jessica's reply never came. I spent the day in a fog of forced cheerfulness. I watched classic holiday movies, ate my solitary meal, and tried to ignore the ache in my heart. The video call my dad had mentioned never materialized. As the sun began to set, casting long, lonely shadows across my living room floor, I allowed myself to cry. It was a quiet, pathetic sort of grief, not just for the canceled holiday, but for the feeling of being utterly and completely alone. I felt like a fool for having built my life around a family that could so easily cast me aside, even for a single day. The day I dreaded most, the first Christmas truly on my own, had come and gone, and I had survived. The worst, I thought, was over. I had no idea it was just the beginning. The evening of Christmas Day bled into a quiet, somber night. I had just finished washing my single plate and glass, the silence of my apartment amplifying the loneliness that had been my unwanted guest all day. I curled up on the sofa with a blanket and my laptop, aimlessly scrolling through social media as a way to numb the lingering sting of isolation. It was a mindless habit, a way to see the world without having to participate in it. I scrolled past photos of friends with their families, of smiling children opening gifts, of festive tables laden with food. Each image was a small pinprick to my already wounded heart. And then I saw it. It wasn't on my main feed. It was a suggested for you video, the algorithm pushing a piece of content it thought I would engage with. The thumbnail was a blurry shot of a crowded dining room, a man in a Santa hat carving a massive turkey. The caption was innocuous enough: "Best Christmas ever, family time blessed." But it was the account that posted it that made my blood run cold. It was Jessica S. My heart hammered against my ribs. Jessica, who hadn't responded to my Christmas text. Jessica, who had been radio silent for weeks. Jessica, who was supposed to be having a quiet Christmas at home because things were too tight this year. My hand trembled as I clicked on the video. The shaky camera panned across a room that was anything but quiet. It was my Aunt Susan's house, instantly recognizable by the hideous floral wallpaper she refused to change. The long dining table was groaning under the weight of a feast, a golden brown turkey, mountains of mashed potatoes, glistening green bean casserole, 2 different kinds of pie. And around the table, laughing and raising their glasses, was my entire family. There was my dad, Robert, wearing the ugly Christmas sweater I had bought him 2 years ago, a wide, unburdened smile on his face. There was Aunt Susan, her face flushed with wine and happiness. There was Chloe, her arm around her new boyfriend I hadn't even been told about. There were distant cousins, old neighbors, and friends of the family I hadn't seen in years. A full house. At least 15 people, all celebrating the Christmas I was explicitly told was canceled. The camera finally swiveled around, and Jessica's face filled the screen. She grinned, a smear of lipstick on her teeth. "Merry Christmas, everyone," she shouted over the din. "Just a little peek into our small, family-only gathering this year. So grateful for everyone who could make it." Family only? The words echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up inside my chest. I was family, wasn't I? I was the one who paid for the new water heater in Susan's house last year. I was the one who co-signed Chloe's student loan. I was the one who sent my dad money every single month to make sure his pension stretched far enough. I was family when the bills were due. But I wasn't family enough for this celebration. I watched the video again, and then a third time, my mind struggling to process the depth of the deception. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just had a small get-together. They had thrown a full-blown party, the kind of Christmas we used to have, the kind they had told me they couldn't afford. My offer to pay for everything, my extra money sent to my dad, my pathetic solo Christmas, it all flashed through my mind, each memory a fresh wave of humiliation. They hadn't just excluded me. They had lied to me meticulously and collectively. My dad, my aunt, my cousins, they had all been in on it. They had coordinated their stories, their silence, their brief, dismissive texts. They had built a wall of lies to keep me out, and they had celebrated behind it. A cold, hard anger began to replace the hurt. It started as a knot in my stomach and slowly spread through my veins, chilling me to the bone. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a last-minute change of plans. This was a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion. They didn't want me there. The reason was a mystery, but the fact was undeniable. I saved the video to my computer, a piece of digital evidence of their betrayal. My first instinct was to call them, to scream, to demand an explanation. My fingers hovered over my dad's contact information, my thumb twitching with the urge to press the call button. But what would I say? What could they possibly say that would make this right? Any excuse would be another lie, another insult to my intelligence. No, a confrontation would only give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. It would devolve into a messy, emotional argument where I would be painted as the overly sensitive one, the one who couldn't take a joke, the one who was making a big deal out of nothing. I knew the family script. I had seen it play out dozens of times when my mom was still alive. I closed my laptop, the image of their smiling faces burned into my memory. The warmth of the blanket wrapped around me suddenly felt suffocating. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, silent street. The Christmas lights on my neighbor's house, which had seemed so cheerful just hours before, now looked like mocking, twinkling eyes. They thought I was a resource, a bank, an emergency fund with a heartbeat. They had taken my love, my support, and my money, and then they had discarded me when I was no longer needed for their festive tableau. They had made their choice. They had defined what family meant to them. And in that cold, quiet moment, staring out at the empty street, I made a decision. I would accept their definition, and I would act accordingly. The silence they had imposed on me for their celebration was a gift. It was a lesson, and I was a very, very good student. The emotional tap was turned off, and soon, the financial one would be too. The days following Christmas were a blur of cold, quiet rage. I went through the motions of my life, logging into work, answering emails, running errands, but it all felt like an out-of-body experience. My mind was a relentless loop of Jessica's video, the smiling faces, the laughter, the sheer, unadulterated joy of a celebration I was not only absent from but had been actively misled to avoid. The phrase, family only, had become a brand on my consciousness. I needed to understand why. The shock had subsided, leaving behind a gnawing, insistent need for a reason. Why go to such great lengths to lie? Why not just tell me they were having a smaller gathering, or that it was just Susan's side of the family, or any number of more plausible, less hurtful excuses? The elaborate deception pointed to something deeper, something more personal. My opportunity to find out came, ironically, from Chloe. She had always been the most sensitive of the two sisters, the one with a semblance of a conscience. 3 days after Christmas, she sent me a text. "Hey Molly, so sorry we didn't get to connect over Christmas. Things were just so hectic. I hope you had a good day." The insincerity of it was almost laughable. Hectic, that was one word for it. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My initial impulse was to unleash the fury I had been carefully bottling up, but I knew that would get me nowhere. I needed information, not a fight. I needed to play the part they had assigned me, the oblivious, slightly pathetic family ATM. So I took a deep breath and typed back a carefully crafted reply. No worries at all, Chloe. I totally understand how crazy the holidays can be. My day was super quiet, just what I needed to recharge. I'm glad you guys got to have a nice day. It was a test. The bait was laid. I didn't mention the video. I gave her an easy out, a chance to either double down on the lie or perhaps crack under the weight of it. She responded almost immediately. Yeah, it was nice, really quiet, just me, Mom, and Jessica. Dad was at home with his feet up. The lie was so bald-faced, so utterly devoid of guile, that it took my breath away. She was either a terrible liar or she was parroting a script she had been fed, a script she assumed I would believe without question. She had no idea that I had a high-definition, 45-second video that proved her a liar. This confirmed one thing: the deception was a coordinated, family-wide effort. They had all agreed on the story. This wasn't just a party I wasn't invited to, this was a conspiracy. I decided to push a little harder, feigning a tone of casual, friendly curiosity. That sounds peaceful. How's your new boyfriend? I saw a picture of him on your profile a while back. He seems nice. Did he get to meet the family? I watched the 3 little dots appear and disappear as she typed, deleted, and retyped her response. The hesitation was telling. She was caught off guard. The lie had been simple so far, but now it required new, complex layers. Finally, the message came through. Oh, yeah, we're still together. But no, he went to his family for the holiday. It was just us girls. Another lie. I had seen him in the video, his arm draped possessively around her shoulder as she laughed at something my dad said. I knew then that I wouldn't get the truth from Chloe, at least not directly. She was too deep in it, too committed to the family narrative. I needed another source, one that was perhaps on the periphery of the inner circle. My mind went to a name I hadn't thought of in years: Carol, a retired neighbor who had lived next door to my Aunt Susan for over 30 years. Carol was a notorious gossip, a woman whose knowledge of the neighborhood's comings and goings was more accurate than any local newspaper. She had always been fond of my mother and, by extension, had a soft spot for me. Finding her number was easy enough. I called her under the pretext of wishing her a happy new year. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, talking about the weather and her grandchildren. Then, I steered the conversation in the direction I needed it to go. It sounds like you had a lovely holiday, Carol, I said warmly. I was sorry to miss out on the big party at Susan's this year. I heard it was quite the event. I held my breath. It was a gamble. I was revealing a piece of what I knew, but framing it as second-hand information. Carol took the bait immediately. Oh, you didn't go, dear? She asked, a note of genuine surprise in her voice. That's a shame. The whole street was lit up. There must have been 20 cars parked all the way down to the corner. I saw your father's truck there. It looked like they were having a wonderful time. Susan had those lovely string lights all over the porch. Yes, I know, I said, my voice carefully neutral. They told me it was just a small, family-only thing and that I shouldn't bother making the drive. You know how they are, always trying to save me trouble. The line went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in Carol's head as she processed this new, juicy piece of information. Well, that's odd, she said slowly. Because I spoke to Susan on Christmas Eve when she was bringing in all those groceries. I told her she must be expecting an army, and she just laughed and said she was. She mentioned something about Jessica's new boyfriend's parents coming to meet everyone, said it was a very special occasion. And there it was, the missing piece, the bitter, ugly truth. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about having a quiet year. It was about presenting a certain image, a perfect, curated family portrait for the benefit of an outsider. Jessica's new boyfriend and his parents. And in that portrait, for some reason, there was no room for me. Why was I not good enough, not presentable enough? Was my quiet, unmarried, career-focused life an embarrassment to them? Did they think I would bore the new potential in-laws? Or was it something simpler? Did they just not like me? The questions swirled in my head, each one more painful than the last. The family-only comment from Jessica's video suddenly took on a new, more sinister meaning. It wasn't just a careless phrase. It was a declaration. They were defining the boundaries of their family, and I was on the outside. They were auditioning for a new life, a new branch on the family tree, and I had been edited out of the cast. I thanked Carol for the chat, my voice strained, and hung up the phone. The confirmation of the truth was some. How worse than the suspicion? It was a cold, hard, undeniable fact. My own family had deemed me unworthy of being present at a pivotal family moment. They had weighed my years of love, support, and financial generosity against the need to impress a stranger, and I had been found wanting. The betrayal was absolute, and my resolve, which had been hardening since I first saw that video, now solidified into something unbreakable. They had made a business decision, choosing to present a more marketable version of their family to new investors. And I, a financial analyst, knew exactly how to respond to a bad investment. You don't just stop funding it. You cut your losses, you liquidate the assets, and you walk away before it costs you anything more. The revelation from Carol, that the Christmas party had been a stage for Jessica to introduce her new boyfriend's family, was the key that unlocked a series of memories and past events I had previously dismissed as insignificant. As I sat in the sterile quiet of my apartment, a timeline began to form in my mind. A breadcrumb trail of subtle slights, odd comments, and ignored gestures that led directly to the betrayal of Christmas Day. My analytical brain, the one I used to track market trends and predict financial outcomes, kicked into overdrive. I wasn't just processing emotions anymore, I was connecting data points. The first point was a conversation with Aunt Susan from about 6 months prior. I had called to check in, and she had spent 20 minutes complaining about the cost of living. Then, her tone shifted. "You know, Molly," she had said, a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher in her voice. "It's wonderful that you're so successful and independent, but a woman your age, you people start to talk. They wonder why you're alone. It doesn't look right." At the time, I had brushed it off as my aunt's typical, old-fashioned meddling. I had laughed and told her I was perfectly happy with my life and didn't need a man to complete it. Now, her words echoed with a new, more sinister meaning. It wasn't about my happiness. It was about appearances. My single status was a loose thread in the family tapestry she was trying to weave. The second data point was Jessica. Over the past year, her obsession with social media had morphed from a hobby into a desperate performance of a life she didn't have. Her posts were a curated fantasy of brunches, boutique shopping, and weekend getaways, all of which I knew she couldn't afford on her meager salary. Where was the money coming from? I had always assumed she was racking up credit card debt. Now, I suspected a different source. I pulled up my bank statements, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I searched for transfers to my dad's account. There they were, every month like clockwork, the supplemental income I sent him. And then I noticed other, more sporadic transfers. "For your car repairs," one was labeled. "A little extra for the property taxes," read another. And then there were the larger sums, the ones I had given to him for home improvements. A new roof last year. A boiler replacement the year before. I had given him tens off thousands of dollars over the years, no questions asked, assuming he, a retired tradesman, was managing the upkeep of his own home. But I remembered a comment he'd made a few months back, a throwaway line during a phone call. "Jessica is a lifesaver," he had said. "She's been helping me organize all my bills online, so much better with all this tech stuff than I am." A cold dread washed over me. My dad, who still struggled to send a text message, was not managing his finances online. Jessica was. Jessica, the aspiring influencer with a taste for a lifestyle she couldn't afford, had access to my father's bank account. An account that I was regularly pouring money into. The picture was becoming sickeningly clear. My money wasn't just supplementing my dad's pension. It was funding Jessica's Instagrammable life. The brunches, the new clothes, the weekend trips, I had likely paid for all of it. I was the silent sponsor of her fabricated reality. My hard-earned money was being siphoned off to create a facade of wealth and success, a facade designed to attract a wealthy partner, a partner whose parents needed to be impressed at a family-only Christmas party. My exclusion wasn't just a social slight. It was a logistical necessity. My presence would have raised questions. What if the boyfriend's parents asked me about my job? What if I inadvertently revealed the true state of the family's finances? I was a variable they couldn't control, a witness to the truth behind their carefully constructed lie. My quiet competence, my financial independence, my very existence was a threat to the narrative they were selling. I wasn't the embarrassing single cousin. I was the inconveniently knowledgeable one. Even Chloe's behavior started to make sense. Her brief, evasive texts, her commitment to the lie she was likely a pawn in her sister's and mother's game. Perhaps she felt guilty, but her loyalty was to them. She was a student, financially dependent on the family system, a system that I was now realizing was built on a foundation of my money and their deceit. I felt a profound sense of violation, deeper than the initial hurt of being excluded. They hadn't just lied to me, they had used me. I was an asset to be exploited, not a person to be loved. My monthly contributions weren't seen as a gift born of love and responsibility. They were an entitlement, a revenue stream to be managed and allocated as they saw fit. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I thought about my dad. How could he have gone along with it? My dad, the man who had raised me, who had always taught me the value of honesty and hard work. But then I remembered the weariness in his voice when he told me Christmas was canceled. The discomfort, the stammering. He wasn't a malicious man, but he was a weak one. He was retired, lonely, and likely terrified of his financial situation. Susan and Jessica had probably presented him with a picture of a secure future, one where Jessica married into money and all their financial worries would disappear. All he had to do was play along. And to him, sacrificing one Christmas with me must have seemed like a small price to pay for that kind of security. The anger I felt was clean and sharp, like a shard of glass. There was no more confusion, no more hurt feelings clouding my judgment. There was only the cold, hard reality of the situation. I had been systematically deceived and exploited by my own family for their financial and social gain. The web of lies was intricate and had been woven over months, if not years. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a passive, emotional, and easily manipulated source of funds. They had forgotten that I was a financial analyst. And now, I was going to do what I did best: conduct a full audit of our relationship and cut off the funding to a failing enterprise. The 4 days between my discovery and New Year's Eve were the calm before the storm, but only on the outside. Inwardly, I was a whirlwind of meticulous, cold-blooded planning. The emotional phase was over. The hurt had crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer a family dispute, it was a financial restructuring. I was disentangling myself from a toxic asset. My first step was to create a comprehensive spreadsheet. It felt both clinical and cathartic. I went through years of my bank records, documenting every single transfer I had made to my father. The monthly supplements, the loans that were never repaid, the large sums for home repairs, the extra cash for holidays and birthdays. I categorized each payment, added dates, and calculated the total. The final number at the bottom of the column was staggering. It was well into 6 figures. Enough for a down payment on a house. Enough for a life-altering investment. It was a sum that represented a decade of my hard work, my sacrifices, my skipped vacations, and my careful budgeting. And I had given it all away, freely and with love, to people who saw me as nothing more than a line of credit. Looking at that number, I felt no regret, only a grim sense of purpose. It was the price of a lesson learned. Next, I addressed the tangible ties. The most significant of these was my father's mortgage. Years ago, when he was in danger of losing the house after my mother's death, I had stepped in. I hadn't co-signed the loan, but I had set up a direct, automatic payment from my bank account to his mortgage lender. It was a substantial amount, the single biggest expenditure in my monthly budget after my own rent. It was the anchor that kept him tethered to his home, the home I had grown up in, the home that was filled with memories of my mother. Severing that tie felt like the most significant cut of all. I logged into my online banking portal. My finger hovered over the Cancel Recurring Payment button. For a moment, I hesitated. A flash of my mom's face, her laughter echoing in the kitchen of that house, gave me pause. Was I dishonoring her memory by doing this? But then, the image was replaced by the scene from Jessica's video. My dad, laughing in that same kitchen, celebrating my exclusion. My mother would have been horrified. She would have been the first to tell me that a house is just bricks and mortar, but self-respect is the foundation of your life. I clicked the button. A confirmation screen popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this payment? I clicked yes. It was done. The payment for January 1st would not be made. The second tie was my father's cell phone. He was on my family plan, another small, monthly expense I had taken on years ago to make his life easier. I went into my mobile provider's website and initiated the process to remove his line from my account. He would receive a notification that the line would be disconnected at the end of the billing cycle unless he set up his own account. One more string, cut. Then there were the smaller, more insidious streams of money. The occasional emergency requests from Aunt Susan, the birthday checks for Jessica and Chloe that were always just a little too generous. These were easier to stop. It was simply a matter of making a decision. The Bank of Mali was permanently closed. The final step was the most difficult and the most important. I needed to protect myself, legally and emotionally. I gathered all my evidence, the spreadsheet detailing the financial support, a saved copy of Jessica's video, the text messages from Chloe with her blatant lies. I compiled it all into a single, password-protected folder on my computer. I even wrote out a clear, concise timeline of events, from the first phone call with my dad to my conversation with Carol. It was my insurance policy. If they tried to paint me as the villain, to slander my name or accuse me of being cruel and vindictive, I would have a factual, unemotional rebuttal. I would not let them control the narrative. As I worked, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This wasn't an act of revenge, not in the hot-blooded, screaming match sense. It was an act of self-preservation. It was a quiet, deliberate, and final withdrawal. I was firing them from my life. There would be no dramatic resignation letter, no tearful exit interview. Just a sudden, irreversible cessation of services. On New Year's Eve, while the rest of the world was preparing to celebrate new beginnings, I was methodically orchestrating an end. I made myself a simple dinner and opened a bottle of champagne. I wasn't celebrating the coming year. I was toasting my own declaration of independence. I had spent my entire adult life making sure my family was secure, often at the expense of my own future. I had poured my resources into a foundation that I now knew was rotten to the core. I raised my glass to the empty room. To a balanced budget, I said, the words sounding loud in the silence. To cutting losses, and to reinvesting in myself. The fallout would come, I knew that, it was inevitable. The first of the month was just hours away. The mortgage payment would fail. The text from my dad would arrive. The carefully constructed world they had built on my generosity was about to crumble, and I would not be there to pick up the pieces. I would be silent. I would be absent. I would be exactly what they had shown me I was to them on Christmas Day, a stranger. The first week of January was eerily quiet. It was the silence of a held breath, the tense moments before a storm breaks. I had expected an immediate reaction on the 1st or 2nd of the month, when the mortgage payment would have been officially missed. But the days ticked by, and my phone remained silent. This lack of response was, in itself, telling. It confirmed my suspicion that my father was not actively managing his own finances. He likely had no idea that the payment was due, or that it was late. Jessica was the one in control, and she was probably too busy posting filtered photos of her New Year's Eve to bother with something as mundane as bank statements. The quiet gave me time to steel myself. I went to work, hit the gym, and saw friends. I was building a N. U routine, one that didn't revolve around the constant, low-level anxiety of being my family's safety net. With every day that passed, the decision I had made felt more and more right. It was like I had removed a heavy cloak I hadn't even realized I was wearing. I felt lighter, freer. The dam finally broke on the morning of January 8th. I was in the middle of a quarterly budget meeting when my phone, which I had placed face down on the conference table, began to vibrate incessantly. It was a text message, then another, and another. I ignored it, focusing on the presentation. But a few minutes later, it started ringing. It was my dad. I silenced the call and tried to regain my focus. He called again immediately, and then a third time. A sense of cold certainty settled over me. They knew. I excused myself from the meeting, my heart hammering a steady, controlled rhythm. I walked to a quiet alcove by the windows and looked at my phone. There were 5 missed calls from my dad and a string of increasingly frantic texts. The first one read, "Molly, call me, urgent." The second, "The bank just called me. They said the mortgage payment was missed. Did you forget?" The third, "Molly, this is serious. They're talking about late fees. I tried to check the account online, but I can't remember the password. Jessica is looking into it." The fourth, which must have come after Jessica had looked into it, was different. The tone of casual concern was gone, replaced by a sharp, accusatory edge. "The automatic payment was canceled. The bank said it was canceled on your end on December 30th. What is going on? This has to be a mistake." And then the final text, the one I had been waiting for, the one that was the entire point of my silent protest. "Molly, I don't know what's happening, but you need to fix this right now. Can you help with the mortgage monthly?" I stared at that last sentence for a long time. Can you help with the mortgage monthly? Not, why did you stop? Not, are you okay? Not a single word of concern for me, the daughter he had lied to and excluded just 2 weeks prior. Just a demand. A panicked, entitled order to turn the tap back on. The assumption that, despite everything, I would simply fall back in line. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of my quiet plan. My thumbs moved over the keyboard, my mind clear and my purpose absolute. I was not emotional. I was not angry. I was simply stating a fact, drawing a conclusion based on the evidence they had provided. I typed my reply. A single, concise sentence that held the weight of a decade of one-sided sacrifice and the cold finality of a closed ledger. "Ask the family you chose." I sent the message. Then, before he could reply, I blocked his number. I took a deep breath and then did the same for Aunt Susan, Jessica, and Chloe. One by one, their access to me was severed. It was a strangely emotionless process, like deleting old files from a computer. I knew this was only the beginning of the confrontation. Blocking their numbers was a digital solution to a human problem. They knew where I lived. They knew where I worked. But for now, in this moment, I had taken back control. I had refused to engage in their drama, refused to be drawn into a screaming match or a session of guilt-tripping and gaslighting. I had given them my answer, and it was as quiet and as devastating as their own silence on Christmas Day. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I thought about what I wanted. My own finances, now unburdened by the constant drain of my family, looked different. Possibilities began to open up. I pulled up a real estate app on my phone and started to browse listings, not just for a bigger apartment, but for a small house with a yard, in a different city, perhaps. A place where I could start fresh, where the memories weren't tainted by betrayal. A small smile touched my lips. The mortgage I would be paying from now on would be my own. The family I would be building would be one of my own choosing. They wanted a family-only celebration. They had one now, and so did I. My family was me. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The week after I sent that final text message was the loudest silence I have ever experienced. I knew that my single sentence had detonated a bomb in the middle of their carefully constructed world, and the lack of immediate, direct fallout only amplified the tension. I half expected my dad or my aunt to show up at my apartment building, demanding entry, or to ambush me in the parking garage at work. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm and detached, but the confrontation I braced for never came in person. Instead, the fallout came indirectly, in waves of second-hand information and through the digital grapevine. The first ripple came from Carol, my aunt's former neighbor. She called me about 2 weeks into Janua. "Rye," her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Molly, dear, I don't mean to pry," she began, which was always her preamble to prying. "But is everything all right with your family? There's a for sale sign on your father's lawn." The news hit me harder than I expected, not with sadness, but with a sense of grim finality. The house was the last physical link to my mother, to my childhood, but it was also the epicenter of their deception. He couldn't afford it without me. That was the simple, brutal truth. They had gambled that my loyalty was unconditional, and they had lost the house on that bet. "I heard he's moving in with Susan," Carol continued, her voice dripping with gossip. "Things must be tight for him. It's a shame, such a lovely little house." So that was their solution. Huddle together for warmth, a fractured family unit consolidating under one roof. The image was almost poetic. They had chosen to be a closed circle, and now that circle was being forced to contract. The second wave came, predictably, through social media. Jessica, who had gone quiet after Christmas, suddenly burst back onto the scene with a series of vague, passive-aggressive posts. There were inspirational quotes about toxic family members and choosing your peace. There was a tearful selfie with the caption, "So hard when people you love show their true colors, praying for them." It was a masterclass in victimhood, a performance for her online audience. She was painting herself as the wounded party, the loving daughter and niece betrayed by a cruel, unnamed relative. I watched it all with a clinical detachment. A year ago, these posts would have gutted me. They would have made me question myself, wonder if I was the villain in the story. But now, they were just data, evidence of their refusal to take any responsibility for their actions. They had created this situation with their lies, and now they were trying to blame the consequences on me. I didn't engage. I didn't comment. I simply observed, my resolve hardening with each pathetic post. The most significant change, however, was in my own life. With the enormous financial burden of my family lifted, my world began to open up in ways I had never imagined. The spreadsheet I had created to track my expenses became a tool for planning my future. I met with a financial advisor, the same one I often recommended to my clients, but had never consulted for myself. We mapped out a 5-year plan. It included maxing out my retirement accounts, investing in a diversified portfolio, and, most excitingly, a detailed budget for a down payment on my own home. The dream that had seemed so distant, so abstract, was now tangible and achievable. I spent my weekends visiting open houses in a quiet, green suburb an hour away from the city, far enough to be a true escape, a clean break. I found a small, charming house with a big backyard, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by my obligations to others. A future with a garden, maybe a dog, a life built for me by me. 4 months after the Christmas that changed everything, I put in an offer on that house. It was accepted. The day I signed the mortgage papers was a surreal experience. The legal jargon was familiar, the numbers on the page were clear. But the name on the deed was mine, and mine alone. I walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright spring sunshine, the keys to my own life clutched in my hand. I never heard directly from my dad, my aunt, or my cousins again. The silence I had imposed became permanent. I learned through the grapevine that Jessica's engagement to the new boyfriend had quietly ended a few months after the Christmas party. Apparently, the reality of her family's financial situation, and perhaps their character, had come to light, and the wealthy in-laws had been less than impressed. My dad was living in Susan's spare room, and the atmosphere in that house was reportedly tense and resentful. They had gotten what they wanted, a family-only unit, and they were left to deal with the consequences of that choice, stewing in the bitterness they had created. My resolution that New Year's Eve had been to reinvest in myself. It was the single best financial and personal decision I have ever made. I learned that love is not an obligation, and family is not a blank check. True family, the kind worth investing in, is a mutual partnership built on trust and respect. The family I was born into had failed on both counts. They had shown me my place in their lives, and I had simply chosen to accept it and walk away. The fallout was their problem, not mine. My future was my own, a clean ledger, a balance sheet, and a home that was truly mine.